Afternoon and good morning. Welcome to today's virtual Think Talk. The Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies, along with the U.S. Embassy here in Manama, have organized today's event. Today's event is entitled The U.S. and Bahrain Electoral Systems, How Do They Work? The webinar aims to discuss how the U.S. electors are nominated, how their votes influence the U.S. election results, particularly in smaller states in the United States. In addition, we also look at Bahrain's electoral model. And joining with me today, we have two experts within the field from the United States and from the Kingdom of Bahrain. Above me is Mr. John Fortier. He is the Director of Governmental Studies at the Bipartisan Policy Center based in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining the BPC in April 2011, he was a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he served as a principal contributor to the AEI Brookings Election Reform Project. He was also the executive director of the Continuity of Government Commission. In addition to that, he was also the project manager of Transition to Governing Projects. He was a regular contributor to AEI's Election Watches series as well. Mr. Fortier also served as the director of the Center for the Study of American Democracy at Kenyon College. In addition, he is also the author of Absentee and Early Voting, Trends, Promises, and Perils. He is also the author and editor of After the People Votes, A Guide to the Electoral College, and also the author and co-editor with Norman Ornstein of Second Term Blues, How George W. Bush Has Governed, including to numerous other academic articles in political and law journals. Mr. Fortier also is a regular columnist for The Hill and Politico. He also commentates on various events such as ABC's Nightline, CNN, Fox News, PBS, among others. Dr. Fortier has a PhD in political science from Boston College and a bachelor's from Georgetown University. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Also below me, we have Her Excellency Nancy Khadouri. She is a member of the Shura Council. She is of the Jewish faith, and she was appointed by His Majesty in 2010, and she was reappointed in 2014 and 18, respectively. Her Excellency serves in the Foreign Affairs, Defense, and National Security Committees and the Shura Council. In addition to that, she also serves in the Youth and Affairs Committee. She was appointed as the member of the Coordination Committee of the Supreme Council for Women for downstreaming women's needs in the economic development of society. In addition to that, she was also appointed as a member of the Supreme Coordination Council for Inter-Civilization Dialogue, which is coordinated for the Inter-Civilization Conference that was under the patronage of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa. Ms. Khadouri continues to actively contribute to society, and she is also a participant in many events, both in Bahrain and abroad. So welcome, Your Excellency. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
My name is Mahmoud Abdel Ghaffar. I am a research associate here at the Darasat, and I will just want to give a quick roadmap for today's webinar. Each panelist will have up to 15 minutes to discuss the topic at hand, followed by a brief discussion period between the panelists themselves. And finally, the last 15 to 20 minutes, we will open the floor to questions from the audience. So feel free to type in your questions in the chat and in the Q&A within Zoom. John, I'll leave you the floor.
Great, thank you, Mahmoud, and thank you to Darasat and the Embassy. Looking forward to talking with you today about American elections, but also very much looking forward to hearing about Bahraini elections as well. So both in the next panelist, also in your questions. So it's a big topic, American elections. I'm going to start with just some basics, big points about American elections and how we run things differently than much of the world. And then especially say some things about our electoral college, which again is different, and the rise of voting by mail, which has been a trend in America, but with the coronavirus and with the accommodations we are making for people voting has become an even bigger issue in American politics. So a lot to talk about in 15 minutes. Let's start with a couple things. First, just to note that we do have a professional election administration system in America. It is run by people who are dedicated professionals who it's their job and a well-run system. It is a complex system and in many ways different than the rest of the world, but it is run not by one body or one person in Washington. It is a very decentralized system run by professional election administrators in states and also in local jurisdictions. And that's one thing we'll keep coming back to, that America isn't really running one election in November. It's running 51 elections in the states and in the District of Columbia, sometimes with different rules, but again, with professionals running those elections. A couple of other big points I'm just going to throw on the table, not talk about much. We are very much a two-party system. Third parties are allowed, and we have some small third parties, but we've had the same two large political parties, the Republicans and Democrats, since the 1850s. We expect the winner of the presidency will be Joe Biden or Donald Trump from one of those parties, not one of the minor parties. And in much of our system, it is a winner-take-all system to win a state or a district. And again, those two parties are the ones that have won the elections of president, but also in our legislatures and our states as well as at the national government. And finally, just before jumping into some of the big points, registration for voting, I just will note that many countries will actually have a census or have the government find a list of eligible voters. We are one of those countries where the individual is responsible for registering, and sometimes also when they move to re-register to a different location. And so, that's something that differentiates us from the rest of the world. Two very big points about America that are different than the rest of the world. One, we vote a lot. We vote not necessarily the highest voting turnout rates in the world, but we vote on many, many offices and questions. We are all focused, of course, on the presidential election. But I will note that on the ballot, there will be many, many other races. People will be able to vote for their United States Senator, for the other legislative body, the United States House of Representatives. Then we have state elections with the same sort of dynamic, with the governor, with the state Senate, with the state House of Representatives, with other offices like treasurer, secretary of state, attorney general. We elect judges not at the federal level, but in the states. And we, at the local level, we elect all sorts of people, mayors and city councils and school boards, and even sometimes the dog catcher or the coroner or the library trustee. So you might find a ballot is quite long. We also have some questions, big questions about your taxes and small questions about should we build that school over there in your neighborhood. So again, California is famous for this, might face almost a long several-page ballot with many, many different questions, many, many different offices. That makes our elections a little more complicated, a little harder to count, but it does allow the people to weigh in on many, many different offices. The second point is that I've stated this before, but we vote with different rules and in different ways in different states. We don't have a national system of voting. There are some laws and rules that apply nationally regarding voting rights and some registration rules, but for the most part, the state laws, the 50 states and the District of Columbia control the elections. And so that means we have some differences. We have differences such as, even before this election, some states out on the West Coast, Oregon and Washington, have been voting 100% by mail for a number of years. Other states don't do that. Other states have different polling hours, slightly different questions about who might vote. Most people are eligible, but there's slight differences in that respect too. Different types of machines that we use. And then noting that the people who actually run the elections are not the state officials, but they are actually the local officials, the city or county officials. And those jurisdictions are very different. Some of them very large, Los Angeles County, over 10 million people. Some small towns in New England, maybe 50 people. And so the types of people who can run election in a big jurisdiction and small jurisdiction differ a little bit. So again, we have this system that allows for difference, but is complicated and somewhat comforting that no one person runs the election. The person running for president isn't in charge of the elections. It's run by this diverse and diffuse set of election administrators. Come to the Electoral College, and I mentioned the last point about the states being important. We have this system of voting for president called the Electoral College. it is a state-based system. So again, we don't have a national popular vote for president. We don't take all the votes in the country that were for Donald Trump and then for Joe Biden and say who has the most and that person wins. Essentially, the goal in the Electoral College is to win the election in your state, in the 50 states and the District of Columbia. Each state has a certain value or number of electors in the system, and those are based mostly on population. The small states have a little bit more representation than the large, but per person. But again, the largest state, California, has 55 electors in the Electoral College, and our smallest state of Wyoming and several other small states have only 3 electors in that college. Almost all the states, but a couple, it is winner take all. If you win those states, you get the number of electors from that state. And at the end of the day, if you get a majority of these electors, 270, you become the president of the United States. Most of the time, the popular vote and the Electoral College vote go in the same direction. I have a book on the Electoral College. I wrote it after the 2000 election. In 2000, we had the system where George Bush narrowly lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College. Donald Trump, similarly, in 2016, lost the Electoral College, the popular vote by a little bit more than that, than George Bush, but won the Electoral College. Most times it goes in the same direction. We had not had a result like that in over 100 years before 2000. But again, this is a system that we've had set up pretty much from the beginning. We've had some changes over time, but mostly from the beginning. And the key issue is win in your states and win enough states to make a majority. And there are some other details. One I'll mention to you that the electors are actually people. They're not just points or votes. So when you vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, you're actually electing a slate of people who support him. And then later, those people will vote in December in the Electoral College. That is usually not very interesting to the American people because we know what's going to happen. And we already know the results from the fall election. But technically that happens. And then Congress counts the votes. And then on January 20th, a new term begins. And that will be a term at noon with either Donald Trump starting a second term or Joe Biden starting a first term. But no matter how the results of the election go, we have to resolve it by then. And we'll begin a new presidency, a new presidential term then. I'm going to mention voting by mail. And the reason I mention that is we've had some very big changes in America in the last 30 years. If you went to almost any state in America before then, you would have found that 95% or more people voted on election day at their local polling place. Some states, again, not all states do the same thing, started to change that 30 years ago and moved to more voting by mail, meaning they opened that up to really anybody who wanted to. It used to be in some states that you had to have a reason and it was limited who could vote by mail. They said anybody can vote by mail, it's a convenience. And some states have really expanded that dramatically, all the way up to 100% of people voting by mail. Other states are more traditional. They still vote mostly in person. That number, another trend is that we've had much more voting early in person, opening polling places before election day for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, more than that. And we have people voting like that in America today. And that procedure has also expanded dramatically. So much so that in 2016, we had over 40% of people voting before election day, either by mail or in person at an early voting center. We expect that number, as it has every election, to go up again, and the number of the polling place on election day to go down. But with the coronavirus, we are seeing the prospect of some very dramatic changes in this respect. This summer, I think people thought everyone would try to vote by mail. I think we've backed off of that a bit, but a large proportion of the people are saying that they prefer to vote by mail. They feel safer voting by mail. Interestingly, we've never seen a division between the two parties in that respect before, but we are seeing now Democrats, the Democratic Party voters are more interested in voting that way. Republicans more interested in voting in person. But we could see close to 50% of people voting by mail, and that's up from 23 or so percent before, and then again another 20% or so people voting early. So these could be very dramatic changes. What does that mean for our election? Well, I think we will again be able to handle the change, but there is very significant change and there are obstacles. And so I don't think it will cause us to have a meltdown or a failed election, but there are many more challenges. To the extent that states are close and the election is close, we may see a longer time for us to count the votes, that we may not know the election result on election night. If it's not close, we will know the result. And if we ever get into a very close recount, and I think that's true around the world, very close recounts are very intense. Both sides really want to win. They scrutinize the results very closely as to, do we count these particular ballots or not? There's a lot of litigation. If we get very, very close, we will see that again. And all of these changes that we've made to voting by mail, all of the voters doing new things and perhaps making some mistakes on ballots, then those will be magnified. So we are watching that. I think it is a dramatic change in the way we run elections. Even the voting booths themselves, we have social distancing and lines that seem longer because people stand further away from each other, challenges with getting poll workers. So lots of things that we are trying to overcome. I think we will do that, but it is a very different election for that reason. And the vote by mail is a phenomenon that has been important, but now is of the utmost importance given all that we've seen. So I'm going to wrap that up here. I very much want to hear your questions about our system, and there are all sorts of other things to talk about, how we fund elections and the polls and whatever else is on your mind during the question period. But I think that's a snapshot of where we are in American politics today.
Thank you for your intervention, John. That was very informative, especially the aspect about mail-in ballots and how it's going to be playing a bigger role this election. Actually, I just had a few questions, if you will. We often hear in the media something about battleground states. Could you explain those to our audience, please?
Yes. So especially because our electoral college means you want to win a state, you get all the electoral votes from that state. Some states are not that interesting in the sense that we know that they lean very strongly to one party or the other. California, for example, leans very strongly to the Democratic Party. It's the biggest state, it's important, but we would be very surprised to see Donald Trump win that state. And the other states are very Republican. The states that really are the ones that we focus on the most are, we call them battleground states. They're the ones that one party or the other could win. And again, if you win a state by one vote, you get all of the electors. And so in the 2016 election, there were a number of battleground states, but the ones that were that led to Donald Trump's victory were some of the Midwestern states of Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, states that were competitive, but Republicans hadn't won in a number of years. And so the shift that Donald Trump brought in the types of voters who were interested in him allowed him to win those states narrowly, closely, but then by winning them, get all the electoral votes. So those states, if you live in a state like that, you are going to have a hard time watching television or your mail without getting advertising all the time from the candidates and the parties. If you live in a state that is not competitive, you will not see as much of that.
So a lot of the campaigning efforts go into these battleground states. And in terms of how much they're campaigning in these states, do you see them overly campaigning in these areas, especially within the last few moments before the election itself? How does that usually work for the candidates?
Yes, so the vast resources are spent in the battleground states by the presidential candidates. You do have to remember, we also do have some other elections going on, Senate and governor's races. So the parties will be spending money and resources sometimes in some other states as well. You bring up a good point about the timing though as well. So back in our old system 30 years ago, where almost everybody voted on election day, there was a big push, and then the end was a real push to get people to show up at the polls and to have last minute advertising. Now we expect that the election season when people cast votes is longer. People may cast a mail ballot by 45 days before the election. They may be voting early now. Some of those votes are cast even before our debates. And so, we do have a system where the parties are now trying to figure out each state what the system is, get to the voters at the right time, sometimes encourage them to vote early, but it's a much more complex environment for our political parties and candidates, and more expensive, frankly, to have this campaign over this longer period of voting, given that we do so much voting early and voting by mail.
Very good. I'm sure it'll be a very exciting few weeks to the run-up to the election. Now we would like to turn our attention to Her Excellency Nancy Khadouri. So if you could please inform our audience about Bahrain's electoral system.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, good afternoon. It is indeed a great privilege to take you on a journey of the electoral process in my country, the Kingdom of Bahrain. Based on the importance of elections as one of the basic rights practiced by citizens, it was imperative that legislations be enacted to support this right in a way that ensures the practice is in accordance with principles and regulations that achieve equality of those participating in the electoral process, and one which is integral to the success of the democratic process. Educated participation of citizens is vital. It's also important to have an equal opportunity to vote for a respective representative, to debate matters under the dome of Parliament in a constructive manner. And I'd just like to begin to brief you all as to the history of the municipal elections in the Kingdom of Bahrain before I go on to the parliamentary process. So the first municipality was established in Bahrain in the year of 1919. And the municipality of Manama is considered one of the first municipalities to be established in the entire Arab world. And the law that was issued on January 20th of 1920 is considered the first legal system for municipalities in Bahrain. And of course, it defines the goal of preserving the health and welfare of the population. And it's also worth noting here that in this period of Bahrain's history, that women had a share in the municipal council elections where they were allowed to cast votes. So that was all the way since the year 1919. And now I take you into a little bit of the history as to the parliamentary electoral process. Bahrain, as many of you are aware, gained its independence in 1971. So the very first National Assembly was established under the Amiri Decree Law number 12 of June 20th of 1972. And then Decree Law number 13 of the same year was passed, providing regarding the provisions for the elections of the Constituent Assembly, and it stipulated all the controls that must be met with for the election of the members of this particular assembly. And after this Constituent Assembly submitted the final draft of the Constitution to the Emir of the country, once approved, the Constitution of the Kingdom of Bahrain of 1973 was issued. And it organized the parliamentary elections, as I mentioned. It comprised of 30 members, 22 of whom were elected, and 8 were appointed. Those 8 individuals were actually the ministers. And I must tell you that at the time, this was a unicameral system. But it has to be important to note that the right to vote was limited to Bahraini male only at that time, who had reached 20 years of age, and if they were naturalized, at least 10 years should have lapsed from the date of their naturalization, and no one who was sentenced for a crime or was in breach of any trust had the right to vote, unless, of course, they were rehabilitated. So the first National Assembly convened on the 16th of December of 1972, and they enjoyed regulatory and legislative powers. However, this experience did not last long. It was dissolved in 1975, August the 26th, due to the council facing periods of tension, mounting differences between the government and the members of the council at that time, because it threatened the political stability. And there were some members, or most of them really had what we call fixed views causing difficulty in the cooperation. And again, it was dissolved because the assembly refused to pass the government-sponsored State Security Law of 1974 because it would not give the judiciary its independence. So it was a very short experience. It was dissolved after, I think, 2 legislative rounds, not more. And then the late Amir dissolved the assembly, formed a new cabinet, suspended some provisions, and then power was given to both the Amir and the cabinet in the absence of a national council. And then, after a gap of 27 years, the next parliamentary elections were held in the year 2002. We had then a bicameral system. It allowed for the separation of powers between executive, legislative, and judicial. And also a very important characteristic of this new constitution was that there was a setup of the Constitutional Court, which had a very important role supervising the constitutionality of laws being passed. And also the advantage of having a bicameral system, our government realized at the time that for democracy to flourish, it would be important to have 2 chambers, because a chamber such as the Shura, an Arabic word meaning consultative council, would act as a filter to solve disputes. And to date, thankfully, it has indeed proved a successful process for Bahrain. And after His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa assumed the reins of power in 1999, there was a National Action Charter drawn up. This was a very important document. We had a national referendum. 98.4% of the population voted in favor of this constitution, where we became a bicameral system, and also we were known from a state of Bahrain to be known as the Kingdom of Bahrain. And very important to know that many laws were issued organizing or concerning the exercise of political rights, because now, in 2002, both male and female were having the right to participate in the parliamentary electoral process, and they could enjoy this participation. Now, it should be noted that the electoral process, of course, as in all the countries, is always surrounded by controls and procedures. So we have to ensure credibility and transparency for implementation. For example, conditions and mechanisms that must be followed for those wishing to run for membership in Parliament, in addition to the candidates' rights, are, of course, most notably the right to complain and object to the supervisory committee as to the integrity of the election in event, say, if the citizen's name is not mentioned on the electoral list. They will also have a right to appeal before the Supreme Civil Court of Appeal against a decision, let's say, of the supervisory committee to safeguard the safety of the referendum and the elections regarding any grievance and any objection that they would submit. They also have a right to obtain the voters list for his or her candidacy, the right to waive it, the right to obtain leave, the right to electoral advertising and campaigning, and the right to observe the polling and counting process. According to this right, the candidate or representative can enter public polling stations, and the polling center of his electoral district, as they call it in the States, or we call it like the respective governorate or constituency of the governorate, to monitor this process. And among the guarantees that would guarantee the integrity of the process is the existence, as I said, of the list of voters. And these tables would have all the names of citizens who fulfill the conditions set out by the legislative authority that would give them the right to vote. So that would be that you have to be Bahraini, you have to attain 20 years of age on the day of the election, fully qualified for that. You must not be convicted of a felony or a crime, and not convicted of any crime that is, say, stipulated under the law on the exercise of political rights, unless, of course, the judgment is suspended. And of course, the voter has to be a normal resident in his respective electoral constituency. According to what is mentioned, or what we call in Bahrain, we have our smart card or a population card. And in event of him residing abroad, the last place of residence that he resided in the Kingdom of Bahrain, whatever address is documented on his population card, is his respective electoral district. And of course, we're a bit traditional, and we always exercise our vote in person and in confidence, because we take, of course, as we say, voting fraud very seriously. So that is why it's important in my country for the person to attend in person and cast the ballot. On the other hand, with respect to vote counting, it's very important to ensure the integrity that each candidate votes for one person that has to be voted for, because otherwise it would be called like invalid votes or suspended vote. And of course, the legislator has guaranteed to the candidate the right to challenge the results of the election. Then, of course, the respective court of cassation has the authority to consider all the appeals, the validity of the appeal, whether it's a null and void of the contested member, whether it rules in the victory of the candidate. So no doubt there may be challenges at certain election time, and we have this respective court dealing with it. What's important to know is we have a Supreme Council for the general supervision of the soundness of elections. And we also have, like, we call them independent monitors. I think in the recent elections, we had 231 people who acted as independent monitors. And they have to have the knowledge of the sovereignty of the law. They have to be trained, and they actually know, so that they can be really independently monitoring the whole process. Like in 2018, we had people from the Transparency Association, the Jurist Society, Public Relations Association, Human Rights Watch Society, National Institution for Human Rights, all of them, monitoring the process. And I'd also like to add that participation of Bahraini women in parliament is indeed an achievement that we're so proud of. A dear sister and colleague of mine, Her Excellency Latifa Al-Gououd, or many may know of the name, she is considered the first female member of parliament to make history. She won by acclamation in 2006. She won again in 2010, and in 2006 she was the only female member. But in 2010 she was joined along with 3 others. There were a total of 4. In 2014 you had a total of 3 women, and in 2018 6 female won the parliamentary seats. And we have also Her Excellency Fawzia Zainal, who is actually the Speaker of Parliament. So this is something very important to see as we go along through the years in the gradual process. And also very important is youth participation. In 2018, youth participation constituted for 50% of the electoral votes, with an entry of more than 50,000 young people, so politically aware, so enthusiastic, wanting to participate in the electoral process of their country, exercising their right. So we're looking at maybe the age group of 20 to 30 years, and they really constituted the largest percentage in 2018. And in the Kingdom of Bahrain, we have 4 governorates, 40 electoral constituencies. We also have, related to municipality, we have 30 municipal seats. In the last elections, we had 54 public and provincial voting centers and 29 centers abroad. 3,600 people voted abroad, of course, in the respective embassies. The turnout, like in 2000, if we draw a comparison, In 2014, for example, we had a 53% turnout for the percentage of, or the number of people who were eligible to vote as per the electoral list. But in 2018, we saw it increase to around just under 70%, I think 67%, if I recall correctly. So I really hope that I've managed to enlighten you all a little bit as to this electoral process in my country. And I'm very happy to help clarify any queries that anyone may have. Thank you for this opportunity, to Dirasat, to the US Embassy, and to all attendees today for supporting this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. That was a very thorough and informative intervention. I just had a quick question, if you will. Bahrain's next election is scheduled to take place in 2022. And this will be the 6th time that Bahraini voters head to the poll. So what are your expectations for the upcoming election?
Good question. I know it's a bit of a way away, but to be honest with you, I personally feel we're going to have even more youth participation and even more women contesting at the elections. Like in 2014, you had 22 women who contested. In 2018, it doubled to 41. So in 2022, I'm sure we'll see a larger number of female participation. And youth as well. And, you know, we wish them all the best of luck. So we wait and see what's around the corner for that.
Absolutely. And John, in your experience, do you expect a larger turnout for the upcoming US presidential election compared to previous elections in recent history?
Yes, so America is not known for having the highest voter turnout in the world. Although sometimes I think people forget our last 4 presidential elections have been our highest turnout elections. So there have been 3 of them have been over 60% and one just below 60% of eligible voters. By all accounts, I think we are going to see an even higher turnout. We don't know for sure, but when we ask people in polls, their enthusiasm for voting and whether they're planning on voting early, whether they feel strongly about the candidates, all of those measures are higher than they have been. So I think we are likely to see a higher number. One other thing to note is, we do have all these elections. We have the presidential on a 4-year cycle, but we have midterm elections for just Congress and sometimes just local elections. Those tend to be lower turnout elections. When the president is on the ballot every 4 years, that's when we really have the highest turnout. And we do see some enthusiasm for this election. And
just very quickly, how does the media or education help create awareness for people on how to register to vote? How do they encourage people to vote usually? What role do they play usually in the elections?
Yeah, because our system relies on the individual to register, we have other forces that try to encourage people to register. So the media and public messaging is important. The political parties themselves are important in getting voters registered. We also have over the years started to build more registration into some of our systems. If you go to the driver's license agency to get your driver's license, which everybody does, or to renew their license, you are required now to have an opportunity to register to vote, and it's become more automatic. And so people do get registered that way. You stay registered if you are registered, but if you move, you do have to change your registration, and that does cause some issues. So we have to often remind people to update their registration or to register in a new place, and that's part of where the media, the parties, and some other groups who seek to help register voters are part of the solution.
That's fantastic. I think in terms of the rest of the world, we always see celebrities endorsing the election, or encouraging young people to go out and vote. So it's always good to see all facets of society to really push people to vote, to exercise their rights. Your Excellency, I just had a quick question as well. How do people in Bahrain get educated about its election, its process, and how to register? Because it seems to be a very streamlined effort more recently.
Well, thank you for your question. I mean, of course, media is very important. We also have a lot of public awareness campaigns to explain the importance of having to participate in this electoral process of the country. Because if you don't have an educated participation of a citizen, they're not going to really vote for the correct candidate to represent them under the dome of parliament. So they have to know, they have to be aware as to who are contesting in the respective constituency, what do they have to offer, television, of course, newspapers, but also the respective member of parliament or candidate, let's say, running for parliament, has a social responsibility to also help build awareness to the person who is going to vote, to the voter, as to how important to convince them. Like, if you vote for me, I'm going to help in this, and actually they're expected to keep their promise, to believe in the principle of what they're going to be fighting for and discussing and debating and interacting. And also, as we speak about media, we do have, for those who may be unaware, that under the Decree Law 15 of 2002, concerning the Shura Council and the Council of Representatives, that under Article 26, all media must observe equality in media treatment among all candidates. So they've really got to be very neutral in also promoting. But again, electoral campaigns are very important. They'll set up their tents, they'll build all this awareness. But I'd say for Bahrain, it's more also television and newspapers and social media today, also Instagram, Twitter, encouraging everyone. So we've come a long way. Yeah.
Absolutely. We also see a lot of social media adoption by the younger voters, and I'm sure it'll be a trend for the future as well. I just want to turn back to you, John, if I can. In terms of how the U.S. presidential election occurs, we all know who the candidates are, but what's the process of someone becoming a candidate for an entire party? Could you just briefly run us through that, if you will?
Yes, and we have a long election cycle if you think about the process of selecting the candidates. In America, and it was not always this way, but really in the last 40 or 50 years, most of our offices, the presidency, certainly the legislature, we have the political parties selecting their nominees to be on the ballot by having another election, by having a primary election. And that is a little different in each state, but basically allowing the voters of that party, or sometimes it's even all voters, to weigh in on who the candidate should be. And for most offices, it's one day. One interesting thing about our presidential election, it was a little hard to see this time because of the coronavirus. It changed things, but we have, each state will have their primary election for president on a different day. And if you remember, we begin in a state called Iowa in the Midwest, and we go to New Hampshire, and we go state after state. And this time, the Republican side was not in doubt. The candidates running against Donald Trump were not major candidates, but for Joe Biden, against candidates like Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bloomberg and others who were rivals within the party, and they all ran on a ballot, and the Democrats in those states picked someone. And if you win, again, enough delegates in the states to go to the party convention in the summer, then you're put on the ballot. So the people really speak both for who is on the ballot for the party, and then we come down to the general election, which is between candidates of the Republican and Democratic parties, and the people speak in a general election to see who the president will be.
Well, thank you very much for your answer. It seems like the U.S. can easily experience some voting fatigue from all the different levels of elections, whether it's state level, municipal level, but it's good to see that people are always ready to exercise their right as citizens. We have 15 minutes remaining, so the remainder of the time, I'd like to pose the questions that we received from our audience. This one is towards Her Excellency, Nancy. One of the members of our audience would like to know what sort of measures has the Bahrain government taken to encourage youth participation, and especially female candidates, to run in the upcoming election? Has this developed naturally over time?
Thank you for your question, and special thanks to whoever asked it. Good question. First of all, in my opinion, it's developed naturally, and how it's developed naturally is being the process by how our government has actually, encouraged skills for the youth, how they've encouraged what we call, or in other countries they call, women empowerment. But I would say in Bahrain, we've gone beyond the stage of empowerment. We've reached women advancement, and how we can maintain that status. For example, Supreme Council for Women was set up years ago, and whatever they do to encourage the women, female candidates wanting to take part in the elections, there would be special programs to support the natural desire of the females wanting to participate through the support of the Bahraini man. We have not made it really without the support of our other half. So with them supporting us, with the Supreme Council for Women encouraging programs to develop the skills. There's a lot of training even by one of my colleagues, Delal Zayed, she's a lawyer as well. She gives also special training for female participation to educate them as to how to go about the process and how to become a candidate, etc. Through all these kind of mechanisms that we have and institutions in the country, it definitely paves the way for one's desire to be interested to participate. Nobody is forced. It is really up to their own discretion. And youth today, I mean, they're very well educated. And as I mentioned before, they're so enthusiastic. They want better opportunities, better participation of their MPs, you know, when they do the debate. So they're being very cautious as to who they want to vote for. I'm not going to vote for an MP who's just going to sit there and not do anything for my constituency or to reform, the whole process. So it's natural through what the government has kindly paved the way for over the years through these organizations. I hope it's clarified the query.
Thank you very much for your response. Turning over to you, John. We just had a question regarding Arizona. Some people are saying that it might turn blue for the first time. Do you think this shift can last, or will it just be unique to this specific election?
It's great to hear. I know people around the world watch our electoral system with great interest. So I'm happy to talk about Arizona. Just, you mentioned earlier battleground or swing states. You know, in the past, Arizona has typically been a more Republican state. And Donald Trump did win the state in 2016 by about 3.5 percentage points. The Democrats have been interested in Arizona because they believe the shifting changes in voters, the demographics are changing. It's a state with a larger Hispanic immigrant population that favors Democrats. More suburban, educated college white voters also moving to that state. So it's a state that Democrats are interested in. The polls look more Democratic than they were 4 years ago, but again, we'll have to see what the final result is. But if it's a state certainly that is one that looks like it has an opportunity to move from being a more reliably Republican state in the past to at least a swing state today, and Democrats are hoping that they'll win in this election. So I'm not predicting, but I definitely am watching that state as one that could move.
Well, it's a very interesting development for sure, and I'm sure a lot of observers will be paying close attention to Arizona. Your Excellency, Ms. Nancy, what do you think the role of technology is when it comes to election, whether in terms of polling, specifically towards Bahrain, or campaigning? How do you think it will impact Bahrain's future election in 2022?
Nice question. We're living now in an era of technology. You know, everything has gone high tech. We're working from home amidst the pandemic with virtual Zoom. So definitely it would have an impact. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they would introduce also on the technology side, like voting, by a certain process by technology as well. But we have to just wait and see what the next 2 years bring. But for now, I mean, I'm personally more of traditional. I like to go myself. I like to place the vote in the box. I like to, to be there, to enjoy that experience rather than sitting at home on a gadget and just pressing a button, Yeah. So we'll wait and see, but it will play a big role. Again, as I said before, social media, encouraging participation, everything. So.
Well, it's very interesting. And back to you, John. I just wanted to know, or actually the audience would like to know, when was the last time an independent candidate won the US presidential election, if ever?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think the answer is they never have. And we have some complicated elections way back in the 19th century with multiple candidates, and it would be hard to say what the independent candidate is. But really, we've been a very, very strong two-party system for, I mentioned, since the 1850s, we've had the same two parties. And we've had some elections where independents have done well, but never won the election. So we can go back to 1912 with Teddy Roosevelt sort of ran a new campaign as a different kind of Republican. So there were three candidates. More recently, in 1992, we had a candidate, Ross Perot, who got 20% of the popular vote, but because he didn't win any states, didn't get any of the Electoral College vote. Typically, we have candidates getting much less than that. The last election was actually on the high side, and all the independent candidates added up to less than 10%. And I think this election, we expect there are a couple of minor parties getting 5 or 6% of the vote total and not winning any states. So it's a challenge to win in a two-party system, to be able to get over the margin, to be the top person. There's no proportional representation. And so both in the legislature and in the presidency, independent parties and third parties and independent candidates have generally not done very well.
Well, thank you very much for that insight. I know it would be very difficult for the smaller parties to gain any real traction in terms of the election, but they still always have a presence throughout any election in any given year. Your Excellency, we have a question posed to you. Actually, we want the person in the audience would like to know, actually, how do you feel these sorts of webinars and workshops about discussing about the electoral systems, how can they benefit the Bahraini public in terms of creating awareness about elections, about the system?
Well, definitely. Was it a Bahraini who asked it?
Yes, actually, yeah.
Okay.
From Bahrain, yeah.
Very interesting, very interesting. And well, I hope they're from also the youth category, because to be honest, in my opinion, it's always a privilege to share about certain topics. I mean, electoral process is a very important topic, and I'm sure it will help build awareness as to the importance of having to being able to participate in the electoral process of your country, and it's just being out there and exercising your right. It is your constitutional right. You have a right to vote. You have a right to boycott the elections. It's a free country. But in my opinion, I know it will help build awareness. And I was told actually by a dear friend who is a lecturer at one of the universities that some of the students from a university will be also attending. So if they're students on political science, I'm sure such a topic about electoral processes, be it in the United States, Bahrain, any country, would definitely be significant to help them draw comparisons between Bahrain and another country, to submit their research papers. So in my opinion, it is important. And if they didn't think it was important, they wouldn't be zooming in today on our webinar.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much for that response. Well, John, we seem to have a few questions about, in terms of the presidential election, in regards to how it could be controversial in terms of a handover or any sort of controversy that might occur with that. How would you respond to some of these allegations that the media has been perpetuating for the past few months?
Yes, so we've heard talk about that in America. I think we should be clear that it's very likely, I believe very strongly, that we are going to have, as we have always had, a peaceful transfer of power. The presidential term ends January 20th at noon. That's in the Constitution, and no president will go beyond that, unless Donald Trump is elected to another term in which he will end his first term and then begin a second term. So the new term of president will begin January 20th at noon. It is true that if we have a very close election, very contested election, as we did in 2000, if you remember in the state of Florida, it was very, very close between the two candidates. I think we will have very strong feelings on both parties. They will both challenge the results as much as they can according to law and use the court system and others to push their point to get to the right result. But ultimately, that result will be decided. The electors in the Electoral College will vote, and Congress will count them, and the presidency then will turn over to someone, either, again, a new term for Donald Trump or a first term for Joe Biden beginning January 20th at noon.
Well, thank you for clarifying that point. I think a lot of people had that question in mind, and with that said, actually, I would like to conclude today's event. So I'd like to thank both panelists for joining in today for their thoughtful insights and disseminating or sort of explaining the different electoral systems in the United States and in Bahrain. I'd also like to thank the Darasat as well and the U.S. Embassy for facilitating and organizing today's event. And please be sure to register and follow Darasat on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. You can find it at darasat.bh for any upcoming events. And thank you both again for joining us, and thank you to our audience for tuning in.
Thank you
goodbye for
too.
now.
Thank you all. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day or a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.